Hello and welcome to a Firstpost PoV. When the Gaza ceasefire was announced a couple of weeks ago, a lot of people doubted it. They wondered whether the ceasefire would be able to hold through all the tensions that we've seen in the region. And in the last few days, we have heard reports of multiple violations by both sides, but overnight came one of the biggest flare-ups since that truce was announced. Israel claims that one of its soldiers was killed in a Hamas attack, and in retaliation, they launched airstrikes across the strip that in the latest count claims to have killed more than 100 people. The question is, does this effectively mark the end of the ceasefire and hope for a broader peace deal in the region? And if not, what was Israel's intention behind yesterday's operation? Let me put these questions to my guest, Caroline Glick, who's the International Affairs Advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you so much for speaking to us on First Post.
Oh, sure, anytime. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about what yesterday's operation entailed. Do we make this as the end of the ceasefire that we had for the last couple of days, or was it a one-off attack that we are not expected to see again from Israel?
So I think what we had was a series of Hamas breaches, material breaches of the ceasefire, something that they've been in really actually material breach for 16 days, because 16 days ago they were supposed to transfer to Israel all of the hostages that they were holding, all 48, both the 20 live and the 28 deceased, the ones that were murdered after they were brought into Gaza. And they did release the 20 live ones, but so far they have not released 13 of the deceased hostages. And so that's the first material breach. The second one is that we picked up, they claimed that they were going to transfer one of the 13 2 days ago. And then what we saw from our unmanned aerial vehicle, which was watching, they threw a body out of a building and proceeded to dump dirt on it. And then they called the Red Cross and said, look, we just found a body. And it wasn't one of the 13. They were further remains of a hostage that they murdered in November of 2023, most of whose remains Israel was able to secure in November. So it was a young man named Ofir Tsarfati, who they murdered on October 7th or thereabouts, brought him to Gaza. And we got some of his remains out then. Then it worked out, and his body was buried. Then we found more of his remains in March of 2024. We brought them out. He had to be reburied. And now they brought out still more of the remains of this poor boy who they apparently cut up into pieces. And his poor family is now called upon to open up the grave once again and bury him for a third time. Okay, so this is Hamas. This is what they did. And we saw the whole thing live. And then after they did that, they had a sniper shoot yesterday morning at our forces in Rafah, which is inside of the yellow zone that Israel controls in Gaza, where they murdered one of our soldiers there, a father of 5, 37-year-old named Effie Feldbaum. And so they murdered him. They killed him with a sniper fire in the middle of a ceasefire. And what Israel did in opening fire against Hamas terrorists is we are seeking to enforce the ceasefire. And lo and behold, suddenly they say that they're going to be transferring the remains of 2 more of the still 13 outstanding deceased hostages whose remains they are holding hostage, that they were supposed to give us together with the live ones and the rest of the deceased hostages 16 days ago. So what Israel is doing is enforcing the ceasefire.
You say you're trying to enforce the ceasefire. Right. The incident that you referred to, where the IDF soldier was killed, I believe it happened in southern Gaza, in Rafah.
Yes,
but
in
the
Rafah.
Israeli retaliation happened all across the strip, including in the northern parts. And like I said, some reports say more than 100 people were killed. A lot of people would turn around and say that killing 100 people is not how you enforce a ceasefire. Why such an indiscriminate response to what happened in southern Rafah?
I beg to differ. It wasn't an indiscriminate response. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of terrorists at large, and if they're not going to agree to implement, if they're not going to implement on the ground the agreement that they made in front of the entire world, right, that was sponsored by the United States and by many, many Arab states and Muslim states, then we're going to make sure that they implement it. And that's what we are doing. And we have reinstated the ceasefire. as we announced a couple of hours ago. So I think that the real question is, are they going to abide by their word? As President Trump said yesterday, and I mean, it goes without saying, but for some reason it still requires being said. Israel did not give up its right to self-defense when it agreed to this ceasefire deal.
Right. Now, Trump's deputy, Mr. J.D. Vance, did say that Hamas or someone else carried out an attack in southern Israel that led to this retaliation by Israel. Does Israel have sufficient proof that the attack that happened in Rafah was carried out by a Hamas operative indeed? And what exactly is that evidence?
Yes, we have evidence, just like because we're surveying everything that's going on in Gaza. It's not as though we're without intelligence, but the Vice
So there's
President,
visual
of course,
proof
is
that it was a
correct.
Hamas attack on Israel, was it?
Yes, and yes, but the other thing that you have to remember is that Hamas is part of a larger sort of terrorist machine in Gaza, all of whom answer to Hamas. About 20 different terrorist organizations in Hamas. The two that everybody knows about are Hamas in Gaza, I mean. The two that everybody knows about operating in Gaza because they're large and they receive an enormous amount of money from Iran are Hamas, which is the effective regime, the one that the latest report showed has the support of some 65% of Palestinians, and the smaller group that acts as its sort of junior partner is Islamic Jihad. But in addition to Hamas and Islamic Jihad, there are another around dozen and a half terrorist groups that operate in Gaza. And it's important to note that none of these groups operate outside of the control of Hamas. So, we've seen this going on with Palestinian terrorist organizations. I believe that you've seen it in India with different terrorist organizations that you have to deal with there, which is that they disaggregate and they say, oh no, this isn't us, this is junior us, this is us the third, this isn't, these are people who are mad at us because we're the moderate jihadists, and then you have the super extreme jihadists, and then you have the super duper extreme jihadists, and oh no, we don't have anything to do with that, and then your intelligence officers will inevitably say that it's all the same. And so we have 20 organizations like that operating in Hamas-controlled Gaza, the 50% that the IDF doesn't control.
Right. Now, the Israeli military has said that the ceasefire is back in effect and that the attack was an operation. It's done, and now the ceasefire is back on. But at what point does Israel turn around and say, okay, Hamas has now crossed a red line, this ceasefire is now dead, and we're going back to the operations? If they continue to, for instance, not return the remains of the hostages, would that be a red line that Israel will draw? Would further attacks on IDF posts in southern or any part of Gaza be that red line? Where is the red line for the Israeli government?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and it's one that Israeli officials, my boss leading the way, Prime Minister Netanyahu, they maintain close and vigilant watch on what's happening in Gaza, and together with allies like the United States, we're weighing the situation on a daily basis. In fact, on an hourly basis, as was the case yesterday. And really, that's what the IDF does. And so, we're watching very vigilantly and trying to figure out which way things are going from Hamas's perspective. And then, and right now the judgment was that we're still capable of enforcing the ceasefire to the extent that Hamas still remains engaged and willing to, cooperate and implement some of its commitments to Israel. We haven't gotten to phase 2 yet, which is when they're supposed to disarm. So we're going to have to see how that goes. And, there's some assessment here that the reason why they're taking so long to return the hostages, as they were supposed to do in total 16 days ago, is because they don't want to have to disarm. And so they're using this time to try to regroup, which is a grave concern for Israel. But again, we're making those assessments on a daily basis. And again, nobody is under any illusions that Hamas has changed. It is still the genocidal jihadist terrorist organization that it was on October 7th, 2023.
I'm also curious about the role of the United States in the operation, because Donald Trump said Israel does have the right to hit back if one of their own is killed. J.D. Vance also said there will be skirmishes even though there's a ceasefire in place. Did Israel notify the Americans before this operation, and what are the Americans telling you post the operation? Because some of the reporting in the US media says the Americans are privately putting pressure on Israel to scale back some of the violations that we've seen since the ceasefire came into effect.
Well, no, I mean, I think that the coordination that we have with the United States is continuous, it's intimate, and it's and it's a partnership. All along there's this concept, who's controlling whom, and the answer is no. We're partners, and the Americans are partners in our commitment. They share our commitment. They're fully committed, like we are, to dismantling Hamas as a terrorist organization, disarming its forces, neutralizing it as a threat, and preventing Hamas or like-minded terrorists from ever reseating in Gaza, rebuilding their strength and reasserting control over Gaza in the future. So I think that, both on a micro level of the day-to-day, looking at assessing the situation on the ground in Gaza, and also looking forward to what kind of Gaza we'd want to see in the future, there's no daylight between the United States and Israel, and reports to the contrary are wrong.
Right. On the issue of hostages, I think a lot of people don't really understand not just the legal, but also the religious and the cultural significance that Israel has to get those bodies back and to get closure for the families. So we understand how important that is for Israel. But there is a side that says that almost 2/4 of all the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. There is some 60 million tons of debris, I feel, and therefore finding all these hostage remains and getting them back to Israel is going to be a long and strenuous process. Does Israel buy that argument?
No, not at all, because, first of all, we have to remember why those buildings are debris. And they're debris because Hamas invaded Israel, slaughtered 1,200 Israelis, kidnapped 250 plus Israelis to Gaza, where they proceeded to torture them, rape them, starve them, for the last ones for over 2 years. So we have to be very clear about why it is that there's so much debris in Gaza. Having said that, the 13 hostages are not buried all over Gaza. We have a very good sense of where they are. So does Hamas, obviously, the better one than even we do. And so we're not talking about having to go through the entire Gaza Strip to find 13 hostages that Hamas murdered. It's not supposed to be a large operation. Hamas is pretending it's a large operation because everything they do is a subterfuge for expanding their power, rebuilding their forces, and preventing their demilitarization. So all of these things, we understand, are towards the goal to undermine the ceasefire agreement that Hamas acceded to, along with Israel, that's sponsored by the United States and so many of the Arab states and Muslim states in the region, and the wider area of Western Asia. So we think that it's very important to make clear where we stand, what the situation is. And right now, like I said, our operations are geared towards enforcing the ceasefire and requiring the implementation of both the return of the hostages and the disarmament of Hamas.
Right. We're all seeing that Hamas is delaying the return of hostages, and Israel clearly thinks that this is a political ploy. The deal also said that Israel would return some of the dead Palestinians and their bodies back to Gaza as well. We have seen reports coming out that some of these bodies are mutilated. They are not being able to recognize who these people are, and therefore effectively they don't know who they are burying down in the ground in Gaza. And DNA tests are also not possible because aid isn't really trickling in as we expected. So how do you square that off when Israel is returning mutilated bodies back to Gaza, who the people are not even able to identify?
First of all, I have to admit that I haven't seen those reports, so I don't want to comment on reports that I haven't seen. Second of all, I have to say that the question of the trickle of bodies at Gaza is obviously a response to the non-return of the bodies of the hostages to Israel. So, we released the terrorist murderers that we were holding in our prisons who had been convicted of massacre inside of Israel along terrorist attacks that they carried out in Israel going back decades. So we released them, but we released them after the 20 live hostages were released to Israel. So here too, what we're looking at is, we have a formula for how many bodies of terrorists Israel is going to transfer to Gaza, and we're maintaining it, but they are per hostage that they release.
Caroline, I have to come back to that point. As the advisor to Prime Minister Netanyahu, are you saying you've seen no reports of the new mutilated bodies being returned to Gaza? That seems a bit hard to believe.
Well.
Right. Now, finally, just a question on aid before we end this discussion. I think the deal promised that around 600 trucks would enter. I think there was an expectation that Rafah would also open. Like I mentioned, there has been...
and those expectations are being met by Israel. All of the things
Right.
that it committed to, it is implementing.
I hear you.
We withdrew our forces to the Yellow Line, and we are allowing the transfer of aid trucks into into Gaza along the lines that we agreed to in the ceasefire deal.
I hear you. The deal said 600 trucks, and I think reports now say less than 100 trucks are entering daily. Is Israel saying that until...
We are allowing in the trucks that we agreed to.
I think we can all agree that 600 trucks is what Gaza needs on a daily basis. Israel says it is living up to its end of the commitment. But are we saying that until the hostages are back, the hostage remains are back, Israel will not allow 600 trucks to enter Gaza? Is it as simple as that?
No, I think there's a little bit of a problem with our connection. But if you asked whether we've suspended the transfer of aid, the answer is no. The trucks continue to go through into Gaza.
Right. That wasn't my question, but thank you so much, Caroline, for speaking to us and answering some of those questions about whether the ceasefire still holds in Gaza and whether Israel has decided to continue its operations or not. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Want the facts?
The latest developments?
News that gets straight to the point.
Well, we've got all three just for you. This is First Post Live, a brand new show, your window into what really matters.
Don't miss it.